Gary said, we're going to start out talking about a couple of things, bagging and tagging and methods of conducting a search, starting out with the methods. And what you have to remember, whether you're talking about or anything that we do in evidence recovery, you really need to remember three basic criteria that I always talk about. One is it effective? Is what you are doing effective? Is it repeatable under the circumstances that you're dealing with? And is it defensible in a court of law? And that's what we're talking about here. Not that you can't modify any of the methods that we discussed this morning, but what you need to be able to do is keep those three things in mind. If you can't defend it in a court of law, if you can't repeat it, and if it's not effective, then don't do it, okay? So let's talk about the legal basis for conducting a search. And this goes back to, Quantico and all of the things you did there. Obviously, a search warrant is the best. For a legal means to be there, a search warrant is your best method, okay? Consent is second. Consent obviously can always be withdrawn. Consent can be limited to you can search my bedroom, but you cannot search the garage or that closet or any of, so that's not, your best situation. Plain view. There are a lot of times that I've lost evidence on plain view. There is pretty straightforward law, but you will find judges out there who their idea of what plain view doctrine is may differ from what the law is. And I can give you an example. We were doing I had a case, and I was actually the case agent in this and was not the evidence team leader, but we had a bank robbery in eastern Oklahoma. And one of the things that we recovered from the scene of the bank robbery, and it was actually a hostage. Did anyone see the movie Bandits, where they came in and they had dinner with the bank employee and they talked about politics and religion? Very similar case, except not so nice. They came in, they held him at gunpoint, the bank employee in eastern Oklahoma, threatened to kill him, threatened to rape the woman. And what happened was the victims didn't drink. Well, we found some Michelob ultralight beer bottles that belonged to the bank robbers at the victim's home. Well, we knew that they belonged to the bank robber. Well, when we finally, after a couple of months of investigation, determine who the bank robbers are, get search warrants, go out to the home. We did not specifically mention Michelob ultralight beer bottles, but in his trash, in a trailer, they didn't have conventional trash service. In the trash in his trailer were Michelob ultra beer bottles, ultralight. And that's a fairly uncommon brand of beer to find in eastern Oklahoma. Maybe if you were in Newark, you might find them all the time. But in eastern Oklahoma, not very common. So we collected those. And then I argued in a suppression hearing that they were plain view. They were in his trash. I argued everything I could. Plain view, it's in his trash. We lost those beer bottles. So again, your search warrant or consent are the best. Inventorying items, if you arrest someone in a car and you're going to inventory their car prior to placing it in impound, but it has to be done fairly contemporaneous with the arrest. Again, search incident to arrest, you're talking about searching the person or the immediate area that they have control or reach in. Public domain, and the bottom one, that's a big deal, especially in eastern Oklahoma. Again, we deal with a lot of Indian country, homicides, killings as we call them, and beatings in eastern Oklahoma dealing with Indian country. Just because you have a homicide and you go into a home does not give you the right to search. You still have to have a legal basis to be there. Any questions on any of that? For any of you who have not been through legal training? No? If a search warrant, every team member needs to read the search warrant, the affidavit, and the items to be seized. And then you can sign a log which states, I have read that. Okay, I know what I'm looking for. I know what the affidavit says of why we are here and why we are looking for the things we're looking for. Okay, so we're going to go back to kind of our search techniques. One of the important issues is make a clear path in and out of your scene and search that area first, especially for transient evidence, footprints, tire prints, because what you don't want, and you'll see it all the time, are just people just traipsing into your scene, and they may destroy or move transient evidence or footprint or shoe print. And I got videos on my memory stick or photos, but a good example of that, we had a kidnapping homicide again in eastern Oklahoma, and he had taken her out to a cabin, raped her repeatedly post-mortem, and then when we finally find her and you get to the scene, well, as you walk up and into the door, if you didn't pay attention, there are cigarette butts and things that we were able to tie to him through DNA evidence on your way into that doorway, because there was really just one easy path, and everybody takes the easiest path of resistance. And if we had not searched that area first, it's in the fall, there are a lot of leaves on the ground. If we had not searched that first, we could have easily lost those pieces of evidence. And once we got inside, the cabin was only 10 by 14, I think. And we worked in a very methodical pattern, working our way into the cabin. We didn't just walk in and wander around the cabin and look for the big items of evidence, because if we had done that, again, we would have missed some footprint impressions on the concrete floor that would have been lost forever because we would have just traipsed over them, and it was just dust. I mean, you had a concrete floor that was covered in dust. You know, he stepped on it, he left a footprint. If we had just walked in there willy-nilly, we would have never found those things. Again, go from transient evidence or your most easily lost down to what is most difficult to find. Plain view versus a very thorough search. And then you can identify evidence with markers. I would recommend that if you have evidence that is easily destroyed or lost, pick those items up before you begin your full search. Okay, labeling rooms and areas. We do this in Oklahoma City all the time with homes. And what you'll find is, yes, I've done a lot of field searches, I've done a lot of open area searches, but the vast majority of my searches have been in homes, inside buildings, and I would highly recommend this. We make placards, and then I've also done it this way. Take a piece of paper and write a room number, and it doesn't matter what you make it. You can make it 2CE, you can make it whatever you want. But those numbers, going back to Gary's lecture on sketching, if you label your rooms, they need to match what Gary puts or what your sketcher puts on their sketch, so that you know and that needs to match your evidence log, and we'll get into the evidence logs in a minute, so that everything ties together, and we'll go through that more thoroughly here in a little bit. But always remember that everything needs, all of your documentation, if you say you got it from room 2CE, that room needs to match the sketch, which needs to match your evidence log. If you call it room 2CE and your sketcher calls it living room, and whoever recovers the evidence, calls it the TV viewing room, then when you go to testify 4 years from now, you're going to be screwed. And I can tell you my average time, I've probably testified, I don't know, in maybe 100 criminal cases just on evidence, maybe 200. My average time of testifying is probably 2.5 years after the fact, okay? So there's 2.5 years of other searches that I've done between the time that I've conducted that search and this one. And I can tell you right now, you will not remember anything. So photograph and document and make certain everything matches. Okay, again, and I'm sure that they talked about it, you need to photograph your evidence without a scale, put it on your sketch, both with and without a scale, without first, so that it does not, as you see it, then with a scale, place it on your sketch, package and seal the evidence, and we'll talk more about that, and then complete your evidence log. Okay, once you have collected those transient plain view items, then you can begin your more thorough search. And again, we'll talk about this in a minute, but we've talked about your methods. Develop your own method, okay? And always stick to it. And that way it makes it easy when you go to testify, you can talk about, this is how I search this room. Well, how do you know that? Because that's the way I always do it. When I go into a room in a home, I always turn to the right. Unless there's something that's preventing me from, if I turn to the right and there's a wall or whatever, maybe that's not the case. But I always turn to the right, and with the exception of very few times. Is it wrong to turn to the left? No. Is it wrong to go to the opposite corner and work one way and then work the other? No. But if you always do it the same way, then you can testify to that, and it makes it much easier. And you'll get asked, believe me, I've been asked some pretty screwy questions by defense attorneys, and it's all a matter of the O.J. Simpson defense. Throw doubt. Doesn't matter. I've been asked what day of the week it was, 2.5 years. What day of the week did you conduct this search? I've been asked what the weather was like outside, even on an interior search. And it's all a matter of, throwing some doubt. How can they throw any doubt into your testimony about that evidence? And then finally, the last thing that you'll need to do is use your alternate light source, which will be later this morning's lecture, and the vacuum to search for trace evidence. Okay. Always, 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 and this goes back to just being able to effectively testify. Have two people should view the evidence in place. Remember the time frame that we're talking about, 2.5 years on average. One person could retire. The person who collected that evidence could retire. They could transfer to another division. They could quit the Bureau. Any number of things can happen. And if you have two people, then you've got a backup. They could just be on leave, and all of us have had to cancel leave before for court. Well, it's a lot nicer if you can call up the second person and say, hey, can you go testify to that so that I don't have to cancel my leave? Take your time. I call it, do we have any SWAT members in here? No? Okay. I call it, you see it a lot, at least I do here, I call it the SWAT approach to crime scenes. Instead of how good a job can I do, it's how quickly can I get out of here? How quickly can I process this room for evidence and get out? Doing a job thoroughly is not doing a job quickly, and you need to take your time. And you need to, don't set in your mind that, hey, I need to be out of here, at 6 tonight, my favorite show's on TV, and I really don't want to miss it. Because what will happen is you'll work, instead of working to the goal of finding the evidence, you'll work to the goal of getting home, okay? Always think about what you're looking for and where it might be. And you'll find it where you think you're going to find it. But don't, and I'll talk about this again in a second, don't automatically think that it can't be someplace else, okay? Wait for daylight if possible. And what we found, like at the OU bombing, they were out all night searching with flashlights and bent over and doing a very good job, but we found a lot of evidence during daylight that they just couldn't see. Daylight is 10 times easier to do a search in, and then look everywhere. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about this. 2-man teams, line search, grid search, quadrant search, and spiral. You'll use a couple of these more than you'll use any other. 2-man teams, they're showing here looking in a trunk of a car. I'm going to use the example of a room in a home, okay? Again, when I go into a room, we try and set it up where you have 2-man teams searching every room. You may have to move from room to room. You may have enough people that you can assign 2-man teams and get several rooms at a time. You should always overlap, okay? So if I always turn to the right, maybe my team member goes to the left, we pass in the middle, and we research the other person's area. And that ensures that you don't miss anything, fresh eyes. One of the things that I do, if I go into a room, and I can give you an example of this when I was in St. Louis. When I go into a room, I do not or try not to go to the area first where I believe the evidence is. So if I'm looking for a gun and I go into the guy's bedroom and I think, well, it's either under the mattress or in the nightstand. That's not the first place I go. In fact, that's the last. And the reason, and this is just an example of the way my mind works, which is pretty awkward, is if I immediately go to that nightstand and I find a gun, I'm going to give you an example, and I find a gun, then I may just rifle, because I think I found what I'm looking for. I may just rifle through the rest of the room and go on my merry way and say, hey, I found the gun, we're good to go. When I was in St. Louis, we had a group of bank robbers that they went into a bank, robbed it. As they're leaving, the die pack explodes. Well, a passerby sees this and follows them to their apartment. They've got their heads hung out the window, red smoke's boiling out of their car. Somebody just calls the police, follows them to their apartment, watches them go upstairs. We get a search warrant. SWAT comes in and arrests them. We do the search. Well, going back to this two-man approach, and in this situation, this has been a number of years ago, one person went in and searched the bedroom. We knew we were looking for a 9mm pistol because we had a shell casing at the bank. He finds a 9mm pistol stuffed under the mattress of the bed. I go back in and I do a search, recovering the area that he had done. I find a 9mm pistol stuffed in the vent to the central heat and air, way back up in there. Now, which one of those two guns do you think it was that was the one we were looking for? Wasn't the one under the mattress. Not to say it couldn't have been. But again, that's why I try not to go to the area that I think is going to be the most fruitful right off the bat. A line search. Okay, line searches are very effective, and this is probably going to be one of the more used search techniques that you will use. The most important part of a line search is remaining in a line. The idea is you're going to, based upon the item of evidence you're looking for, set your spacing, stay in a line, stay that far apart, and you look from, if in their case, I would look from the center line of each person next to me. Okay, that would be my search area. Well, it's not effective if you have them staggered out all over the place. And the reason that I look overlap, again, it's overlapping too, if you're looking for small items in a grassy field, a lot of times they can stand right over it and not see it. But you, from a different angle, may be able to see it. And again, set your spacing based upon what you're looking for. If you're looking for a helicopter, they're probably a little close. You can probably spread out a little more. If you're looking for a shell casing, they may need to tighten up a little bit, okay? Any questions on either of those two, the two-man or the line search? Grid search. You can set your grids up in any method or any size that you want. Typically, about the smallest I'll go is about a 1 meter grid, okay, 1 meter by 1 meter. In Oklahoma City, we used the grid search. Do you know how big our grid was? Each grid. 1 city block was a grid. Okay? And you just number your grids. In this, and again, it doesn't matter how you do it, but it needs to be, remember those three things. Effective, repeatable, and defensible. Okay? So here they used alphas across the top and then numbers across the bottom. Now, one thing, if you're out in the middle of a field and you have no reference point, I would set a point and put it on your sketch, maybe drive a stake, maybe use triangulation method to fix this point, okay? The other thing I would always do is I run my grid by the cardinal direction. So it will run due north, south, east, west. And again, it means that it's repeatable. You can go back out to this scene, and whether you drove a stake or whether you used triangulation to fix a point, you can recreate that grid. You know what your grid size is, you know what your starting point is. Okay, any questions? No? And there they did the same thing, and they put it on a computer diagram. So here's an example of a grid search. This is not one of my photographs, but they use string, okay? They set up their grids, you can see their numbers, and they photographed it. Again, so that you can have a reference point. This is another grid, and here you have one already set up, okay? You can see the squares in the concrete, both on the wall and on the ground, okay? You can use natural boundaries. Again, go back to Oklahoma City. We use natural boundaries to create our grid. Why go in when you're searching an area that large and create another grid when you can use a city block? And again, here's so you can see they numbered their grids, both on the wall and on the ground, and then they could locate their item of evidence within that grid. And again, with a grid search, going back to the sketching, and I'm sure Gary covered it, you're going to measure. You can do several things, but one thing you can do is measure it and actually place it within that grid. Using the corners of your grid, you can triangulate, or you can also collect and just say, these items of evidence were collected from grid number 125. Okay, I've seen it done both ways. It would let your case drive how detailed you're going to be. Okay, a quadrant search. This is commonly used in bombing scenes. Okay, and actually in Oklahoma City we kind of did a hybrid because we had a portion of a quadrant search there on the actual site. The outlying areas had become a grid. So here in a bombing scene, you've got, let's say, the crater where the device actually activated, and then you just set quadrants out. Again, I would set them north, south, east, west so that it's easy to go back and recreate that quadrant. Okay? So there is his crater. That's going to be its own search area within the confines of that crater. And then quadrants are set out, again, see, by north. So by this picture, you think, well, that's an odd way. He should have a quadrant pointed straight up. No, it's by north. That's north. And then he's just labeled them. And that needs to match in your sketch, in your evidence recovery log. Spiral search. This is probably the one you'll use the least. In fact, I can only think of a few times I've ever used it. It's very good if you're by yourself. It's hard to do a line search if you're the only one out there. A quadrant search, you're going to start in the middle and just spiral out. Or I'm sorry, a spiral search, you're going to start in the middle and spiral out. The problem is it's very difficult to maintain your spacing. What happens is you start in the middle and you've got nice spacing, you're getting a good overlap of the areas that you're looking. By the time you get out very far, now all of a sudden the last path I walked may be at the end of that table. Okay? And it's very difficult for me to effectively search that much area. Again, getting back to doing a cautious and then a vigorous search. You're going to start out with a cautious search, picking up or marking easily destroyed and transient items of evidence. Then you're going to go into a much more detailed, vigorous search. Safety is always first, okay? Don't take your crime scene home with you. Absolutely. And we've all been there. I can tell you a number of stories where I've walked in the door and I probably should have stripped down and taken a hose to myself outside. Can you testify to everything you did to prevent contamination? And we actually, at a team leaders conference a couple of years ago, had somebody from Great Britain come out, an investigator, and to hear what they go through in bombing scenes, because the defense attorneys over there have become very knowledgeable about cross-contamination of scenes. You go to your bombing scene, you dress like I am now, you process that scene, then you get a call from your ASAC and says, hey, we think we have the guy and he lives at 123 A Street. We need you to go, we've got a search warrant, we need you to go search his home. If you walk in the door in those clothes, you've just contaminated that scene. Modern scientific equipment can pick up and detect especially explosive materials at such a small scale that if you walk into that scene with those clothes on, in all likelihood you've just contaminated it. Okay? Don't ever put your hands places. When I found that gun down in the vent, the way I did it, now eventually I had to stick my hand down there, but I had a mirror, basically like a little SWAT mirror with a flashlight. And I looked down in there and there's a bag of money and a gun. All right, we're going to get into evidence packaging. Now this is all covered. Did y'all get this little binder, this little book, the Pocket Guide to Handbook of Forensic Services? It was made this size for a reason, okay? It's because it fits in that pocket right there. Everything you ever wanted to know about packaging is in this handy little book right here. But packaging is dictated by what you expect to get out of your item of evidence. Okay? So if you're looking for DNA, then one, it has to be dry, air dried. You cannot pick up a blood-soaked shirt, throw it in a plastic or paper bag and call it good. Okay? Because mold, things are going to begin to grow on that damp item and destroy your DNA evidence. So first, it has to be air dried. Second, it has to be packaged in either paper or a Tyvek bag. So you never package DNA evidence in plastic. Why? Moisture. Same reason they told you not to put your cast in a plastic bag. Okay? It will, even if you air dry it, there is going to be moisture. There's moisture in the air. When you seal that bag, there's moisture in the bag. It will destroy that DNA evidence. Paper breathes. The Tyvek bags, this is the greatest thing ERT's done in a long time. That's a great little package right there. Okay? So, DNA, your evidence is always packaged by what you expect to get out of it. Okay? And also by a lot of times you're going to have multiple things. You may, it's kind of like the game of Clue. You may have a candlestick, in the living room by the butler, but you may be looking for DNA, fingerprints, tool marks. So you may be looking for different things. So you have to work backwards. You have to go from what is most easily destroyed and what is of most value, and then work from that backwards. And then you can sometimes separate things. If you have a candlestick and it's got blood on it, what else could you do? And you think maybe there are latents on it. Any ideas? Anybody? No? You could separate the DNA evidence from the candlestick. You could take a sample of it. Okay? You could do any number of things. Don't put your blinders on and think, well, Wes told me during that boring lecture that I had to put DNA evidence in paper. Okay? You can separate them. You can do any number of things. Talk to your team members. Talk amongst yourselves. Because you can do a number of things to help when you have multiple items or multiple things you're looking at. Soil samples. There are occasions when you will take a soil sample. Glass jars or film canisters. Gun and knife boxes, again, one of the best things ever made. And we'll actually, I'm gonna give you an example here. I'm not gonna do my gun, mainly because it's loaded. This is a type of gun box. This one actually does not have you'll see that one has the little punch holes in it in order for you to be able to use zip ties. Well, this will do the exact same thing. You can just take and punch a hole in it, use a zip tie. Now, in the FBI, a certified firearms instructor has to certify on the FD-192 that gun is unloaded. So just be prepared for that, and the evidence techs will not take it until it has been certified. Okay? So what I typically do, we're very fortunate where I work. We have a number of them who are always available. If I think I have guns on scene, I'll take one of them with me. They can certify it, they can make it safe, render it safe, and then I'll put it in the box. Okay? So this is the same exact thing, except it's a knife box. Now, knife boxes are great. What happens typically when somebody gets stabbed? When you use them? Actually, I don't know what that is. Huh? Blood. So what are you going to be looking for? What does this qualify as? It's not plastic, okay? So you can package DNA. Cardboard is essentially paper. It's breathable. Okay, so you can take this box, and I guess you put the other half on top. I don't use this type of knife box. You put your knife in there. Again, take a zip tie, because what else are you probably going to be looking for? Fingerprints. So if you strap it down, you limit its mobility. What did they tell you yesterday was the #1 enemy of fingerprints? Friction. So you want to limit its mobility. Now the other thing, and they didn't bring any, if you find the knife in the open position, you may want to use a Sharpie's container. And again, but you have to think about, what am I doing here? If you've got blood all over the tip of that knife and you stuff it down in that styrofoam, you're not going to destroy it because it will just rub off in that styrofoam, but you need to think about those things. Is that what I really want to do? Okay? Any questions about that? Gun and knife boxes are the only way to go. I carry them with me everywhere I go. It's very difficult, although it has been done, to get a gun, a long gun, in there. Now, by the same token, if I'm picking up a handgun, is this what I want to use? If I don't have a gun and knife box? Or a knife, a little bitty knife, or if this is my weapon that I find out on the scene, I have no Sharpie's container, it's folded, okay, when I find it, and I don't have a gun and knife box, and I don't have a Sharpie's container. Is this what I want to use? Yes and no. Not that big. Okay? You don't want to put this knife in this bag. Paper bags are great. I use them all the time, but I try and match them, and I have bags smaller than this. Match the size of the item that you're recovering with the bag that you're using. If you have explosive materials or items with explosive residue, unused, unlined paint cans. Now I'm going to give you an exception to that, but I'm going to talk about one other thing first. You're on scene. I don't normally carry these with me. 1, they are extremely bulky. 2, they make ungodly noise driving down the rough roads in eastern Oklahoma. Okay? And 3, where can you get one of these at any time? Day or night, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Nope, not Walmart. This is the only time that Walmart is not the answer. Where can you get one? Huh? No, actually, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, any decent-sized town with a fire department and a arson investigator will have these. Glass jars. If you are dealing with any type of fuel, incendiary device, glass jars are the only way to go. Almost everything other than DNA evidence can be packaged in plastic. Plastic or this Tyvek are the greatest thing ever. So the great thing about plastic is that case agent can look at it. I can see what's in there. I don't have to open that package. And the same thing with this. It's got a little window. I can shake it around and I can see what's in that package without having to open it. Now, so most everything else other than DNA evidence can be packaged in plastic. And we're going to do some examples here in just a minute. Okay, static-free bags for any electronic media, digital media or bomb components. Bomb components, obviously, you don't want a static charge to make that thing detonate or activate. Computer hardware, digital media will destroy evidence, will destroy that recording device or what the little X's and O's or ones and zeros that are put on there. There are 7 items that have to be on every package of evidence. That's what's great about these bags. Guess how many little fill in the blanks there are on this package? 7. You guys are, and Keith told me you guys didn't have a brain in your head. There are 7 items. So these you need to remember, and they're pretty simple. File number. There it is right there. Date of search. your item number. And every item number needs to be unique. Okay? Now let's go back to that two-man search of a home. And how and again, this goes back to I do it this way. Doesn't mean you have to, and it doesn't mean it's the only way to do it, but it's the way that I always do it. And so then I know when I have to go testify, if my item number will incorporate in a home setting my room number. So if I am in room C, then my item number would be C-1. So I know that that is the first item of evidence located in room C. The reason I do that is in a home, if you have a full team complement out, 8 people, you've got your photographer, your sketcher, your team leader, and everybody else is out searching. 4 or 5 people are out searching different areas. You can certainly do it as just a sequential item number 1. But then what happens is you have somebody in room C who finds an item of evidence. He or she has to go find out what's from the evidence collector, from your evidence tech or whoever's running your search log, your evidence log, what's my next number? Okay? If you do it with a room number as part of that item number, then he or she knows, well, this is the first item of evidence I found, and I'm in room C, C-1, C-2. And it time savings. Doesn't mean you have to do it that way. Description of item. Okay, now, your description, if you put on here pink G-string underwear, okay, on this bag, and someone else is filling out your evidence log, what does it need to say on here? Yeah, not thong, okay? These two have to match, absolutely verbatim every time, okay? And that is something that we will be checking during your practical, is does your item of evidence match your log? And same thing, it needs to tie back to your photo log. If you call it pink G-string underwear, they call it that on here, that's what it needs to say on your photo log. Not photo a hot thong, whatever. Okay, so your items, and I don't think I can overemphasize this, your item description absolutely must match. And again, it gets back to what happens if you pick up 5 thongs. It can become difficult to differentiate which one is which. Location of item found. Now, again, I would be as detailed as possible, and probably I'm usually a little more anal than they are here in the pictures that you'll see. I'm in a home. My location found is going to be room C, 123 A Street, Edmond, Oklahoma, under bed, northwest corner. If I find 2 items of evidence in that location, under the bed in the northwest corner of room C at 123 A Street, Edmond, Oklahoma, my next package is going to say the exact same thing. And it goes back to they need to be able to stand on their own, okay? So that when a defense attorney or a prosecuting attorney hands you that package of evidence, and if you put for location found under bed, okay, it's going to be, well, under which bed? Under the bed in room C, even though, so I become very descriptive on here, and I follow through with every item of evidence. In a car, I'll do the same thing. If my description or location where found would be, under driver's seat, 2003 Ford Excursion bearing license plate, 123 AAA. If I find another piece of evidence under that same driver's seat, it is going to say the same thing. Okay? Any questions on that? Full name of the person or people who found it or saw it in place, and initials. So both people. So here is, now let's, packaging that in paper, what do you think they're looking for? What? DNA. Fingerprints, if they were looking for fingerprints, they'd be in plastic. So here's an adjustable wrench. There's your file number, your date, your item number, your description. Again, this is found on bench. I would probably be more descript there, okay? Found on bench where? It's easy to write it once or twice or 20 times. A lot easier than scratching your head and looking like an idiot on a witness stand, okay? Initial, always, at least one person needs to initial and date across the evidence tape. What we try and do is, again, separate responsibility. The person doing the tamper evident tape, it's a lot easier if you don't have gloves on, okay? An easy way to do it, if there is such a need.
Hey Wes, we wondered at the last search, do those K-Pack bags, do they have to be,
No.
the Tyvek, do they have to be
No.
taped too?
No, because they've got built-in tamper-evident tape. So basically on this, I want my knife right here. Otherwise, I'll go home in about 3 days and go, what do I do with my knife? Yeah, exactly. Somebody at the lab's going, what's this case number? 315 QT? I don't see that case anywhere. So if you seal this, okay, then there was a photograph of it up there. If you try and open it, see, it's got its own tamper-evident tape.
Okay.
So you cannot reopen it from that without, let me pass it around, without it coming up with that. The easy way to do this, again, is to, and you want to keep completely encircle this, is to do it this way. Lay your tape down on something flat. Don't put it on your view card. It does not come off view cards. Okay? I can tell you that I checked in. When I left St. Louis, my view car had evidence tape on it, and well, it doesn't come off. Now, some labs, like our state lab, will not accept this. Okay? If I'm going to turn something into our OSBI lab, I have to go back and put like a packing tape around that seal. The easiest thing to do is also staple it first. So if you're dealing with paper, staple it. Okay? Don't forget your 7 descriptors that you need. Initial across the tape. Same thing on that bag. You're going to initial across that back seal. Initial and date across this tape. And again,